Andy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi Dan, thanks very much for having me. I'm all good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from sort of no man's land, UK. Whenever anyone asks me where I'm from in the UK that's not from the UK, I always say Cambridge, but really that's like half an hour away. I'm in Northamptonshire, so I'm in the middle of fields and sheep and stuff like that.
Nice and quaint, nice and peaceful, out of a city.
Yes, yes, that's it. We have sheep for neighbours. It's nice and quiet, but we're about kind of like an hour and a half into the middle of London, so it works quite well, especially for my doctor's appointments because I'm in there at least sort of once a month, and so it's not too much of a faff to get in and out.
Wow. Yeah, so we'll cover that in a bit. But Andy, for the people watching online and listening at home, who are you? Who is Andy Collinson?
Yeah, so I've lived with atopic dermatitis my whole life. Someone I always say is that my mum says that one of my first words was itchy, or I used to say ishy. Um, as I say, I dealt with it my whole life. I've been through numerous dermatologists. My parents, bless them, when I was growing up, tried everything and anything, from the usual stuff to, you know, Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture when they kind of ran out of options. And then it kind of carried on into adulthood when I sort of took over my own care, constantly experimenting. Um, but over the last sort of, I'd say 5 to 7 years, there's been a lot of medications come through that have been able to significantly help people and do so in a more safe manner than some of the previous medication options. Most recently, I've stepped into advocacy, which is something I never kind of expected to do. We might come on to the long story of that later, I guess. But it was always something I would downplay and kind of try and ignore. But over the last couple of years, I've started doing more and more advocacy projects. And then most recently, in an attempt to be more proactive with my advocacy, started my own podcast, which is only recently gone live. And so, yeah, I guess that's me.
Now, your podcast has been an inspiration to myself for starting this. I think a lot of people, when I say people like us, those with visible differences, it's hard to kind of reconcile and relate to many people we see online and in the media. So I think the more of us that have these platforms, whether it's video, podcasting, Instagram, TikTok, then the better, because we can all learn from each other and we can all share our upbringings and what we have to go through and how we kind of not get over what we have to go through, but it's someone else to talk to, right? Because I think a lot of people don't truly understand what we go through on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Is there
definitely.
is there a specific moment from your childhood where you felt different, or you thought there's something different with me, or I don't
Yeah.
feel how my friends feel?
I think that I keep hearing this story again and again as from people from the visible difference community, and that they have the fortune often to grow up in a caring, loving family or support network, and so they don't feel any different to anyone else until they kind of hit early teens, maybe a little bit younger, and it starts to become very apparent, normally from peers and being at school, that you are different. Um, which could be, I guess, quite traumatic. Really, all of a sudden you're being told by everyone that you're being reminded constantly how different you are, and I think that it's quite important. I think it's important not to shy away from the dramatic stories and the difficult stories, because I think they help to really hammer home how difficult this can be to live with and deal with, is to live with their visible difference. So I think a lot of us have kind of a huge bank of things to pull on, unfortunately. But for example, things for me, I remember being at school and um, someone had misbehaved in the class. I'm not sure what they did, and the teacher decided it was the person that had gone the most red was to blame, and obviously that was me because part of my condition presents as extreme redness. I had other situations where I was at a house party when I was, I think, maybe 18, 19. All you're trying to do is look cool and feel cool and fit in. And I
Mhm.
remember in a room of maybe 30 other teenagers, a girl, because I had this scarring on my neck, which is a little bit more faded now, um, shouting, what is wrong with your neck? And the whole room going quiet, every person looking at me, just wanting to fall into a hole. And but I take the one that sticks with me the most, a little bit of a long story. I grew up in a Mormon family, and my whole extended family were Mormon. Not so much now. I left as soon as I was allowed to, and kind of became dragged everyone with me. But we were on holiday in America, and the Mormon church in America is huge, especially compared to the UK. And so primary, which was kind of kids class on a Sunday, over in the UK there'd be maybe 5 to 10 kids. We went to a church in America, and this church had I think it had 4 or 5 primaries in this one church, and each one had probably 40 plus kids in each one, so it was huge. And I got put in one of these primaries, and because I was the new person, they decided in their wisdom to introduce me, and I immediately started to go red. And I'm at the back of this class of 40 to 50 new kids in a different country, and then I hear one person say, "Oh my God, he's so red." And then I hear another kid say, "Wow, I've never seen someone so red." And all of a sudden, the whole room is staring at me. The comments are getting steadily more and more cruel. I just feel trapped. None of the teachers or adults did anything. And I'm there suffering with my chronic skin condition in a room full of people essentially mocking it and feeling like there was no escape from it. And, you know, something my therapist says is that everyone has those humiliating moments that they think about when they're laying there at night trying to get to sleep. We've all had them. But I think people with visible differences have had more than their fair share. And I think that is a root cause of a lot of the mental health issues that so many of us suffer from.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think comments from kids and adults, especially, they're kind of different. And sometimes when it was kids, I'm like, okay, like you're a kid, you don't really know exactly what's going on.
Yeah,
But in my mind, when the comments come from like adults or teachers, you're just like, it's so far out of left field that you're like,
mm,
how can you get away with saying that? And B, what makes you want to say that to someone who's, younger than you? So
it's bizarre.
when you would
Yeah.
when you would go red, like, and they would point it out, was it like kind of like a flywheel? So because
Hmm.
then you're being called out for going red, you go more red, and then did that make it you feel worse? Like, did it kind of exacerbate symptoms and how you felt?
Yeah, nail on the head for sure. That's exactly how it would go. It's the same. It was essentially blushing. So the same scenario that we all experience with blushing, but mine would be to an extreme level. If you're blushing and someone calls out that you're blushing, you go more red. And it was the same thing. But yeah, mine was just to an extreme. And so yeah, it created this horrible cycle that would just get worse and worse. And it impacted me in other ways. And that I didn't wear I didn't wear a t-shirt until I was about 16 because I wanted to cover my skin as much as possible. But then in the summer, it would make me hotter, and then I would go
Yeah.
more red, and then and that would invite more comments. So yeah, it's difficult. And one of the difficult things with that symptom, I suppose, is that it's quite a normal bodily function to go red, and so people will throw it out as a joke and as banter because to most people it is. If you get burnt or if you have done some exercise and you're quite red, people are like, "Oh wow, you've really caught the sun or whatever," and people will throw that out there, um, and so that comment will sometimes come my way unmaliciously, which makes the situation quite complex because what they're actually doing is kind of mocking a serious medical condition, but they see it as a joke, and so I'm kind of
Mhm.
caught in a catch-22 of not wanting to embarrass them, especially because they don't mean it particularly. Also, I want that situation to be over with as soon as possible because I feel embarrassed, but I also want to educate and make sure they don't do it to the next person. And I'm trying as I get older and I'm stepping more into advocacy to be brave, to be present and say, I know you don't mean this, but just to make you aware, this is the situation.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything worse than when people say, "Oh, so and so is going red," or "so and so." It's just like you said. It's like you said. It's just a natural reaction that you
Mm,
could say anything about anyone personally, and they're gonna, "Oh, the attention's on me."
mm,
They're gonna blush. Something. So moving on from that, and I know like we both have physical and visible differences, but mentally, like growing up, how was your mental health as a kid, teenager, young adult into now? How did that affect you? Because I know that visible differences obviously are visible, but including myself, like I think what many people don't realize is the mental battle that goes on within as well, like having to explain yourself or having to explain yourself and how you look to different demographics, like whether it's kids or adults or even older folks. Like I've had, you know, not my grandparents, but elder individuals say like, "Oh, like what happened to you?" Like in, sometimes, like you said, its tone of voice can really depict what they kind of mean, whether they're just being malicious or whether it's just an innocent comment. But mentally, it still hits you mentally. So yeah, how
Mhm.
was your mental health like growing up as a teen, adult, and into now?
Even hearing you say that there, what's happened to you just makes my blood boil thinking of it. That lack of emotional intelligence to say something so tactless, to say what's happened to you. It's infuriating when people say things like that. But it's been pretty mentally catastrophic, I would say. And I think that as a kid and as a teenager, I just simply tried to deal with it by getting my head down and charging forward, march or die. I just tried to downplay it, ignore it, do my absolute best. But ultimately, it had a profound mental effects, and it's something that has followed me into adulthood of feelings of low self confidence, extreme low self confidence, if I'm being honest, anxiety, feelings of inadequacy. Um, yeah, it not only does it negatively impact me physically, but it affects me all encompassingly mentally also. And it's something that I'm very much trying to still deal with to this day. And I'd like to say that I'm out the other side of it and I'm all good now and I'm fine, but I ultimately don't think I am. And it's something that I'm working on. And I think that with a lot of visible differences, there's this idea that it's not life threatening, which is the reason why it can be dismissed. But I think that the mental health effects are pretty dangerous. I think that it's something I mention quite a lot, but in a society where suicide is so prevalent, to think of that as not at the very least as a contributing factor, I think is quite naive. And I think that's where, yeah, there's a real danger and an urgency. That we need an urgency to dealing with the effects of visible difference.
A lot of people say, about social media, and I, for one, haven't really been a big social media user. I mean, I use it because I live in a different country to my parents and family, so I kept, your typical mainstream platforms. But if I find myself on there too much, it's just mentally it's just awful because especially in an environment where, filters and changing your appearance to make yourself look more handsome or more, more beautiful, especially with like young boys and young girls.
Hmm.
I just think mentally the whole filters aspect, trying to make yourself look perfect is awful. And I think it's
Mm.
one of the worst things that social media platforms have introduced. And I hope they get rid of it because you're getting kids and teenagers now growing up thinking, I can take a photo of myself and I can put a filter over it so I look different and I can change and make myself look better. And I think, especially with those who, you see the AI revolution and facial recognition, I know there's some folks with changing faces and my face who are addressing that and Face Equality International. But I think as long as social media is around and people use it for a force of good, like we're talking right now, we'll share our
Hmm.
stories, but there is the other half of it, which I think people are negating as well, which
Yeah,
is huge towards mental health.
yeah, 100%. And I found myself falling down that rabbit hole myself in that growing up, I kind of always wanted to prove everyone wrong, and I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I still do to a degree. I want to stick it to the people that weren't very nice to me and prove that I'm worth something. And so I started using social media for the same thing to try and show how great my life was. And that is completely unhealthy and something that we shouldn't be doing. And a benefit of stepping into advocacy is I think I've been able to be a lot more open and honest about the situation. But yeah, I totally agree. The metric almost of success on social media in a lot of instances is stereotypical beauty. It's full of perfect looking people. Yeah, and I think that when you look at countries like Australia bringing in bans for under 16s, I think is a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's too um, it's too addictive. It's too all consuming. And it's just in a way quite dangerous. And I think that it does need to be regulated, especially for young people.
Definitely. So moving on from that, when it comes to self-acceptance and growing up and understanding your condition and what triggers it and what makes you feel good versus what doesn't make you feel so good, how has your journey to like self-acceptance and accepting the way you look, how has that progressed over the last like 5, 10, 15 years, and what like avenues have helped towards that? I know you mentioned the advocacy work that you're doing, which
Mhm.
is amazing. Has that aided your self-acceptance journey?
100%. Yeah, I think that's probably had the biggest effect overall is the advocacy work. Before that started, I was still very much in the mode of ignore, downplay. It's not a part of me. Keep your head down. You're going to find a cure eventually. Um, yeah, and then I just had this this opportunity just for my first advocacy project, which after that kind of compounded to other ones and opened my eyes to that world, and stepping forward and accepting who I am to a degree, has been really really helpful for sure. I just feel like a weight is lifted off my shoulders, and in a more kind of I don't know if practical way is the right term, but all the people directly around me completely understand the situation now. Obviously my close family always understood what was going on, and my very close friends, but outside of that, all your, less close friends and acquaintances weren't really sure, didn't know the rules of engagement, um, didn't know if they needed to, offer to help or anything like that, or when they were crossing the line. And now they do. I think now they understand the situation, and that makes it so much easier. So when I walk into a room of people that I'm friends with, and I'm having a flare, they know exactly what the deal is, and I don't have to feel the fear so much of anticipating that comment, because I think when people are aware that you're dealing with a pretty serious skin condition, 99.99% of people are good enough to never even consider making a comment. It mostly comes from not understanding the situation properly.
What's an example of like a comment that you've had recently? Has there been anything like in the last few months that someone said to you just and you stand there and you're like, I can't believe you just said that. I've had
Uh,
one not too long ago, and I
yeah, go
was,
on. Let's hear yours.
even now, well, even, I'm in my early 30s now, and I kind of not, it's tough because I say I trained myself how to react and how to like deal with it. But I was playing tennis with my wife, who was also a tennis player, and I got off the court, and this lady said to me like, "Oh, have you scratched yourself? Looks like you're bleeding down the side of your face." And I was like, and it took me a second. I struggled with kind of blocking it out too far sometimes in terms of like I would kind of shut it out and be like, "Oh, it never happened to me, so
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with me." Like, and then once I started leaning into it and talking about it more. Um, I started thinking about it more. There was a good couple of years where I didn't even know that I had, and it sounds really ridiculous maybe to some folks, but I didn't have a scar on my face because in my own head, I pretended it didn't exist to kind of overcome any comments or social situation, kind of like removing yourself from the situation. In
Hmm.
my head, I was like, oh, it doesn't exist. So anything that says anybody anything to me isn't real. So she caught me off guard, and my wife didn't say anything, but I was taken back, and I was like, no, no, I just got a scar. And she goes to me, oh, it looks terrible. Like I wouldn't want to have that on my face permanently. It's been years since I've had like something said to me like that, and I had to sit down, and I was like,
Mm.
it's just I wasn't like upset, but my wife knew that for like a couple of days. She was like, my confidence had just been like shattered.
I simply
Yeah.
cannot understand the mindset that a person has to be in to think that's acceptable to say to someone. To be so
Mhm.
socially inept and emotionally inept is beyond me. How did you react to her in the moment?
I didn't react like outlandish. I used to when I was younger. I used to
Hmm.
have. I mean, I played tennis at an international level, and as you know, is like if you play sport or you're doing activities, people will try and say things to get into your head. And I used to get comments all the time about your face, like, oh, I'm losing to a guy who looks like a thug, or like this guy's Scarface, or like, oh, he's so ugly, which is like one thing, right? But like, when it's a permanent fixture, I used to get comments all the time. But so I kind of built this resilience to like, okay, they're just talking smack because we're in a competitive environment. But the comments from people who, just people behind a counter. I was with my mum in a shop in Winchester once, and this lady said to me, she was handing, I think I bought a pair of jeans or something, and she said to me, I would hate to look the way you do. That would terrify me. And I think she kind of meant it from an approach of like, I kind of sympathize, like, oh, I'd hate that. Like, but her tone of voice was more of, oh, I would hate looking like that. And I was like, okay. And I was my mum was very upset. And I think 14 or 15. So my emotional intelligence was like building, but I still couldn't understand why my mum was like so upset, because I think it was something which she couldn't control, I couldn't control. Yeah, it just takes one little, like you said, why are you thinking like this? And 99% of people are great, but it just takes that one negative comment. You could be told you're the best person in the world, and that one
Mm.
negative comment is the one that then you remember for
Hmm.
weeks.
And I think that you're almost downplaying it a little bit as you're saying it. I
Mhm.
that is that's really shocking to hear that, and the fact that that happens all the time is completely unacceptable. I think that yeah, we can get a bit dismissive because it happens too much to us. You're talking about something that is entirely out of your control and is potentially your biggest insecurity, and most people don't have to go through life expecting to be attacked for that on a daily basis. If you're overweight, I don't believe that most people who are overweight get such malicious, nasty comments. I'm sure they do. Of course they happen. Of course they do. But when they do happen, it's reacted to appropriately by everyone else. It's what on earth are you doing saying something like that? How can you be so stupid? But for some reason, when it comes to visible difference, sometimes it's almost like a different rule of engagement. And it's not met with the same level of shock and outrage as it should be. Just if you take someone, for example, who's an acid attack survivor, and they're brave enough to now step into the world and to try and rebuild their life, they shouldn't have to go through life with the fear of people making callous, malicious, and nasty comments, and then nothing happening. We're in a society now where, thankfully, we believe there's certain things you shouldn't be discriminated against for, and there's certain things you shouldn't be expected to receive abuse for. We believe that you shouldn't be racist to people. You shouldn't, if you saw someone in a wheel, if anyone saw someone in a wheelchair and someone else was verbally abusing them, everyone would be absolutely horrified and appalled. But for some reason, someone with scarring or someone who's a burn survivor or someone like that, it doesn't seem to be the same level of protections. And I simply don't understand why we're being excluded from that. And I find it really, really frustrating. Something that is a little bit of um, a silver lining, I suppose. I was speaking to my friend Oliver Bromley the other day. I'm not sure if you saw his story. He was quite a big profile case for. He was told to leave a restaurant because he was scaring the customers. Unfortunately, the response to that was appropriate. People were appalled, as they should be. And I think a few people were trying to get the pitchforks out and try and go and find the restaurant that had said that to him. So that's good. That's good. But I think on a day to day basis in society, somebody insulting, making comments about someone's visible difference needs to be as unacceptable as any of the other things that I mentioned. And it needs to be, and it also needs to be acted on appropriately. Sorry, I feel like I'm ranting and monologuing, but
No,
like
no, you go
there
for
needs
it.
to be legal protections in the same
Mhm.
way that there's legal protections against other um, marginalized groups, whether it's LGBT community or you name it. There's legal protections there, and there's legal consequences if you cross that line. And I think that needs to be the case. The same case with visible difference. To use the acid attack survivor situation, the physical and mental turmoil that person is going through, they should not then have to step out into the world and have the risk of being insulted and people being cruel. I think.
No, I 100% agree. It takes someone special to be insulted and just sit there and be like, I'm just going to let this go. Like, it
Mm,
affects me, but I'm just going to let this slide and not bring up a fuss. Like, sometimes people have said things to me, and all I've wanted to do is just not lash out, but just be like, you have no idea. But then the other part of me thinks, this person may have never seen someone who has a large scar down the side of their face before or has this condition. And I agree, like, the comments that are associated with visible differences should be treated the same as, racism, sexism, ableism. Like, you don't
mm,
go to a restaurant and if there's steps to a restaurant and there's no wheelchair access, and you're saying to someone in a wheelchair, like, sorry, you can't eat here, that's disgusting and it should be
Mm.
called out. And
Mhm.
yeah, in terms of visible differences, it needs to. And I hopefully, work like you're doing will contribute towards that in the future. So, no,
I
that's
hope
amazing.
so.
And
I hope so. I think it's just one of the last groups that seems to face open discrimination in polite society still, and it seems to not be. Yeah, I keep hearing stories of people literally, essentially being told they haven't got a job before they've even opened their mouth because of the way they look. In 2025, that is totally unacceptable. That should not be a thing. And going back to the Oliver story, the police coming out and telling him that is a hate crime, there's nothing they can do about it. What are you talking about? If that's a hate, what other hate crime happens and there's nothing the police that can do about it? And what is the point of that being a hate crime if you're not going to act on it? So yeah, I just feel quite passionate about
no, it's great.
it.
And I hope when I talk to more people like yourself and others, and I'm sure this is how you feel doing your advocacy work as well. It's the community of going from, do I just feel strange because this is happening to me? Or am I just like overreacting? And then once you start listening to stories like yourselves and others on your show and others with my face and changing faces, you start to realize that wow, there are so many people who go through the same daily, weekly, monthly battles that I go through physically and
Hmm.
mentally on a
Hmm.
variety of scale. It could be scarring, burns, dermatitis. It's just we all go through a similar thing, and to have that community is just, I think, amazing now.
Oh, yeah, it's the best feeling. I'm a campaigner for Changing Faces, and I went to a meetup a couple of weeks ago in London for some media training and stuff like that. And to walk into a room of people, of strangers, it was the first time in my life that I was able to do so without feeling anxious and nervous. And to be fair, I was still anxious, but I wasn't as anxious as I normally would be because I'm
Yeah.
anticipating that comment. I'm anticipating an awkward question. Everyone in that room understood what we were there for, and everyone had their things, and it was wonderful. It was lovely. It was a really nice feeling to not have to spend the day with my shoulders around my ears, just waiting for someone to say something stupid. Frankly, so yeah, that community is very powerful and something I never really considered before. The advocacy stuff that I needed that community. I needed people who were like me. Um, I think that there's a lot of talk in society now about seeing representation, seeing people like you, and I'd never really considered how important that was until I started doing my advocacy work, and now I can see that it's vitally important.
I didn't know changing faces existed until I was home in the UK for a couple of years, and can't remember how I think I was just on Instagram and I saw Katie Piper, who
Hmm.
I think is amazing. So I followed her on Instagram and I saw some of the like hashtags and some of the like stories that she was mentioning. I think it was through one of her stories that she shared something from someone that then I saw changing faces, and then I just went down this rabbit hole of like reading. And I think I spent like 3 or 4 days just reading everybody's stories and what they go
Hmm.
through. And I got a bit upset actually. I was like, I had never seen this before. Like I could have used this when I was 14,
Hmm.
15, and not necessarily getting bullied, but like, I mean, it is bullying. I guess any comments that's made out of haste towards you is bullying.
Hmm.
At the time, I took it in a different way, but yeah, I could have, if I'd known about changing faces when I was 14, 15, like I would have been a totally different person, I think, in
Hmm.
terms of confidence.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's so powerful now to like keep sharing your story and other stories and learning about these organizations which are helping people who have visible differences excel in the workplace, excel in life in social settings. Have you experienced any comments during job interviews or during work where you thought, I'm not going to be hired?
I tell you one way it was quite difficult. There's two ways in particular I can think of that I found it difficult, and it affects everything. Part of going into the working world is you have to appear confident and competent and likable and high energy. And if you're going on 2 hours of sleep and you feel mortified in the way you look, that's very, very difficult. So one way that I struggled with that is that there was a point where I ran a little electrical firm for like 5 years. I had a few guys working for me. My wife was my ops manager, and I would have to go into meetings with big contractors to try and secure work to pay my guys. And I'd have to go in there competent and confident and likable. And as I say, I'm on 2 hours sleep. I feel like I'm covered in itching powder. I'm embarrassed about the way I look. and it just made that whole situation very, very difficult. Another situation I had was that I was working on a maintenance crew. And I was an electrician for 10 years, and I've met some lovely guys and girls. Tradespeople have a reputation of being very harsh and straight talking. That wasn't really my experience. There was plenty of banter flying around, but there's always that line of respect. I think those guys know, you don't insult each other's wives personally. You don't XYZ, right? There's just this unwritten rule, and one of them for me was my condition. People didn't cross that line, which I really respected. It certainly ripped you in other ways, but it was all in in good humour. But I
Mhm.
worked in a specific maintenance crew for about a year, and I very quickly became the butt of every joke. I don't know if that's part of being an apprentice, but I'd never experienced that before. And I'd worked in multiple places as an electrician, and there was comments coming about me being red boy and throwing these jokes about my skin and getting quite nasty and quite personal. And it made me dread coming into work every day, frankly. And honestly, when people are being that insulting and that cruel, let's be really authentic and open. You start to have some dark thoughts. You start to have some dark thoughts about yourself, and you have some dark thoughts about what you want to do to those people that are essentially bullying you. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for very long, and I moved on. But yeah, that was a situation of workplace bullying, frankly, and I was very happy to have moved on quite quickly.
Place environment's always tricky because I have worked in a few different industries, and every HR training, that you go through for the start of a job or orientation, you go through, workplace harassment, expectations of the job. And not once did I ever encounter anything that to do with visible differences or there was, subjects on racism, which is of course that needs to be in there,
Hmm.
but and some disabilities, like wheelchair users, but not once did I ever see anything about, oh, if someone has a facial disfigurement, or if someone
Hmm.
has missing limbs, or if someone has
Hmm.
large scarring or burns, or they're blind. Like, I never saw that. And I would bring that up during some HR trainings, and they would be like, oh, we don't see it as important. And I was like, oh, okay. And this is before the advocacy work, and this is before
Mm.
knowing about changing faces in my face. I was like, oh, okay, like that's weird, but sure. And I had two instances at a career fair. I finished my MBA. I worked my butt off for 2 years, and I went into this career fair. It was a medical device company and a pharmaceutical company, and it was just sales rep positions. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I've been thinking about sales, medical device or pharmaceutical sales. And one of the guys from a very reputable medical device company, which I won't name, he says, "Oh, you don't have a face for sales. It's not very presentable." And for a second, I was like, I almost laughed because I think there's no way you've just said that to me. Maybe because I was,
It is
I
so
finished in my
shocking at
late.
first, isn't it? It really takes you back in that moment, for sure.
He was an on-campus recruiter, so maybe he was, you know, early mid 20s, early his career, and I was like, there is no way you've just said that to me.
Hmm.
And I moved on and I complained to my school, but nothing happened. Because it's a verbal comment, and it's something which, I'm not going to moan or complain if it wasn't said. And even then, if it's not brought up, so I actually emailed the company and I was like, hi, like, I went full, like,
Good for you. No, good.
I
It needs to be
emailed the
done.
company, and
Mm.
I said, I, this was said to me during a career fair, like, this is not acceptable. I didn't get a response. And it happened again when um, the pharmaceutical company said, "Oh, your face isn't really a suitable face for sales. Like, they're looking for a different demographic." And I was just like, "Ooh," So since then, and this might sound ridiculous to a viewer who doesn't have visible differences, and it might sound very, very similar to our community, is that every interview that I've ever had since, like whether it's on camera, I turn my face like a certain way because straight on, like you might not be able to see. If I in interviews when there's been a panel of 3 or 4 people and it's been side on, when you catch people in their eye contact, that they're looking at you, and as soon as you
Hmm.
look at them, their eyes turn away.
Hmm.
And I've had that a lot, and it's something which I still think about to this day. Every
Hmm.
interview, I'm just like, do I look like a thug? Like, is someone going to hire someone that looks like a thug? And because I've been called that, it's very hard to forget that.
I hope that one day we'll look back at this in the same way we look at racism and ableism, and we look back and just everyone shakes their head at how people could be so unevolved and um, just just so discriminatory. And I think it's so important that these examples keep continuously be hammered home, like you just said, because it's almost as if people sometimes don't believe us. They don't believe that there's a discriminatory factor to living with a visible difference. So I think these clear, obvious examples need to be put out there over and over again for people to hear it and to understand it. You know, my first guest was a lady called Chelsea Peets, who I think you know quite, or you know of, and she was saying that one of the problems is that we don't have a lot of people with visible difference don't have a disability, and so they kind of fall between the cracks. But she was saying there's something that the way we change that is we have a social disability. You know, she says I have a social disability. No matter what I do, how I turn up, there will be people that will discriminate against me, and it's something she says that she's experienced, you know, plenty of times. And I think that unfortunately there's a certain section of society that until there's legal protections, they won't do the right thing. They won't just be decent human beings. They have to be forced to be. And so until that happens, this is going to continue to happen. We're going to be turned away from jobs. We're going to experience all manner of discrimination until there's some sort of legal protections there. You know, as I say, we just should not be in a society in 2025 where those kind of comments are allowed to be freely and openly said without any kind of consequence.
Especially by employers. Because at football matches, you hear comments being made towards players, which by fans, and they think, oh, I'm not going to get found out because I'm in a crowd of like, you know, 20,
Mm,
30, 40,000 people. But they find them because there's cameras in stadiums and there's microphones by the size of pitches. So
mm-hmm,
you can plead all you want, saying like, "Oh, I never said that. I never did that," but you did, and you deserve the treatment that's coming to you.
mm-hmm,
And like you said, same with folks who discriminate against those with visible differences. There's no way
mm-hmm,
that you should be telling someone that like you don't look very presentable. I'm sorry that we can't have you selling our product or working in corporate or a person facing position because you might we don't know how our customers are going to judge you and
mm-hmm,
how they might think you're scary. You might scare kids, like and I used to think about going into teaching, and that was one thing because I love coaching. I love trying to make people their best self. And once when I was on a tennis clinic helping out, and kids are telling you like, "Oh, your face is scary," it's like, am I going to get that from every single person every day
mm-hmm,
for the rest of my life if you
mm-hmm,
interact with them? And it makes you start to doubt things. What's one thing that I mean, we just spoke about it. Well, what do you think is one thing that people understand or not understand, but misunderstand about, living life with the visible difference? Because we've mentioned the comments and we've mentioned the treatment in certain work environments, but is there anything that, what's the biggest thing that comes to mind to you?
From an AD perspective, if I can speak to AD for a second, it's that particularly with healthcare providers, we're lumped in with the AD that a lot of people know, which is a rash on your arm. It's a little bit of an itch. Um, and it's just simply when you get to the chronic side, the very severe side, that is not the same thing. You're talking about the difference between a headache to a full-blown migraine, for example. It's not the same thing, but it's often treated that way. So you'll go into your GP and they'll offer you a moisturizer, and then they'll kind of send you on your way. um, that needs to change. Primary care need training to identify when the situation is beyond their ability, and especially when the situation is an emergency. Because from a mental health perspective, there's times when it is an absolute emergency. When you're on, a couple of hours sleep and you're covered head to toe in rashes, and um, you're feel like you're covered in itching powder 24/7. And I had situations where I had so many infections that I was kind of almost feverish and shivering, and that is not the situation to send someone away with a moisturizer. The situation is far more complex, and you need to refer urgently. And that's one thing I think that a message that I would like primary care to hear.
And yeah, that's unbelievable. It's so hard to like, reconcile that. You go in with your atopic dermatitis and they're just giving you a rash cream and like come back in like 2 weeks time. Like,
Yeah.
is that is that like a common experience that you've had? Is there a specific moment that you can share where where you haven't been taken seriously by the medical system?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that is a recurring theme, I think, from Visible Difference in general, really, but definitely from AD. Um, this thing of it's just a rash is infuriating because for some people it is just a rash, but when that rash covers your entire body and all the other symptoms are listed, it's not just a rash. And so you have to, as someone, if anyone else is listening with AD, get used to advocating for yourself, get used to stamping your feet and not, taking no for an answer and demanding what you need. Because frankly, in the system at the moment, unless you get to the best places, and they are sparse, but when you get there, it's brilliant. You have to really, really demand it. I think I got to the age of about 14, 15. I started on cyclosporin, the immunosuppressant. That didn't work. So I went on to methotrexate. Tablets, which didn't really work, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. But then I finally got to Guy's Hospital in London, St John's Institute of Dermatology, which is just brilliant. Started on methotrexate with them, and this was before all the latest medications had come out. So methotrexate was kind of the end of the road. And for people who know that drug, it's quite a heavy drug. It's used for people who have organ transplants. You have regular blood monitoring because it can affect your liver. And I was in my mid-20s and I had elevated liver function. And I thought, I want to try one more time to manage this without heavy systemic medication. So I came off it. This was around my mid-20s, and my symptoms were skirting along just about being okay. I'd get to the point where I'd want to pick up the phone to Guy's Hospital, and it would just about be okay. And then all of a sudden, it just went off a cliff, and I just cannot stress how horrendous it was. I was covered, and I say this literally, I was covered head to toe in thick rashes all over my body. I was shivering constantly. I had infections all over my body. My scalp was saturated with weeping sores. I had an ulcer in my eye from the skin around my eye being so inflamed that it rubbed a wound in my eye, which was as painful open as it was closed. I was getting 2 hours sleep. My wife and I, we'd finish work, have dinner, and then just go walk all night because I couldn't sit there and read a book or watch TV because I just felt like it was just awful. And so I've always had quite a bad experience, particularly with GPs, frankly. But I went to the GP because you have to go through the process of being referred. I thought, at least in this situation, they're going to see the urgency of this. It's there for everyone to see. I'm sat there shivering. I'm a wreck of a human, and mentally, I'm absolutely on the edge. And again, I was met with just this nonchalant, dismissive, casual attitude. I was offered a moisturizer. I was told that I could be referred, but it's going to be about a year's wait time. Um, I just cannot explain how utterly crushing that is in that situation. And I'm very fortunate in that my whole life having to deal with this, I know how to work the system, and that's something that people need to know. In terms of, you find the best place, you find a consultant that works in that clinic, and you book a private appointment with them. And we shouldn't have to book private appointments. It shouldn't be the way it is. But when you're in that situation, you beg, borrow, and steal that £200-300. You get that appointment, and that consultant will see the urgency, and they'll get you in the door quicker. Shouldn't be the way it is, but that's what you need to do to survive, literally to survive. But for people who don't know that and aren't confident enough to advocate for themselves, or maybe they're neurodivergent and they find it difficult, that's the kind of situation that can end up with someone killing themselves. And I felt quite suicidal in that situation. So that is, as I say, the GP, that the front gates of healthcare in the UK for people living with AD desperately need to change.
Yeah, that's awful to hear. Like, I wouldn't, I could never reconcile with understanding that. I have my things and other people have theirs, but just hearing that, having to wait so long for something which sounds excruciating every night, and the lack of sleep must have been, I think you mentioned that earlier, the lack of sleep, that's like a huge, not just for the dermatitis, but in terms of just overall life, right? Relationships, work, focus, driving, life to life, health and wellness,
Mm,
like so much data that comes out on lack of sleep, and especially
mhm,
with shift workers, right? With
mm.
life outcomes, just like that must have been detrimental. Was the lack of sleep a major factor as well in like in just general life? Did it affect relationships and your own
Oh
mental
yeah.
health as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it underpins everything, doesn't it? Your sleep to a
Yeah.
degree. It it it's something again. It's said a little bit dismissively. I think because we all go through periods in life where you suffer with your sleep, whether you get a bit of insomnia or you have children or whatever,
Mhm.
and so we kind of just say it half-heartedly. But when it's day after day after day, it's kind of a simple way to put it. Cover yourself head to toe in itching powder and then try and go to sleep. Or
Yeah, it's
lay in
awful.
an ant's nest and then try and go to sleep. That's what it feels like. And you wake up in the morning and your bed sheets are covered in blood like it's a murder scene. And then you have to go about your day. And you have to go about your day feeling horrendous and also mortified in the way that you look. It's just very difficult, and I'm conscious of I don't want to come on every podcast or do my podcast and just woe is me and how awful my life is or whatever. But I think that that's the way to change things. I think people need to hear the reality of what it's like, and I have to say that over and over again because I don't think people truly understand it and people truly grasp just how difficult it is and how much it's not just a rash.
I think that you've said it perfectly. There's the acute stage, right? And then there's chronic. But when you suffer with things chronically, like you have, and it's, you hear those stories having to cover yourself up just to sleep, it just puts it on a totally different scale. And
Yeah.
like you mentioned, the mental aspect of it is just exhausting.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very exhausting, and there's also the inconsistency, which is very hard to deal with. It's the constant up and down. If today I'm doing okay, but who knows about tomorrow? It oscillates with a mind of its own, which is very difficult to deal with, especially when I believe I'm somebody that does everything I'm supposed to. If whatever the doctors say, I will do it. I try and make sure my body is as healthy as possible, but I still feel a total lack of control. And that is mentally exhausting as well. You're either struggling because you're in a flare or you're anxiously awaiting the next flare. And every social situation is underpinned by the fear of waking up on the day and you're in a bad way.
Yeah. It's living life day to day. It's almost like living life day to day, isn't it?
Mm,
Waking up and being like, how am I? My mother has chronic Crohn's disease, and
hmm
I know that she goes through a similar thing in terms of like how, if I eat this for dinner, how am I going to feel tomorrow? And just,
hmm
it's just people who don't experience the things like you do. It's just the mental exhaustion of worrying. People worry
mm,
about, whether it's people might worry about things at work, or people might worry about like, oh, what's so and so going to say to me if I bring this up? But when it's your whole life and your whole body that takes up your thoughts every single day, it's
hmm
yeah, I just don't think people realize how exhausting and mentally frustrating it is.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's kind of a little bit of an interesting perspective that I think that I have in terms of visible difference is that I can see both sides of the coin. So as I have days when I'm clear and I have days when I'm struggling, and the difference of the way people treat you is just so tangible. I'm not talking about friends, of course. I'm not talking about family, but I'm talking
Mhm.
about your interactions with people on the street, colleagues, etc. It is black to white how you're treated when my
Yeah,
visible difference is there compared to when it's not. And so that's kind of a bit of a different perspective, I suppose, of it. Is that I can see both sides of the coin, but then also internally, I wish I could say that when I'm flaring, I know how to just get on with it, or how I can just forget about it. I get on with it, but it's a huge weight and burden every second of the day, and being happy and being normal and trying to go through life is feels very hard, um, no matter what mindset I try and get myself into. I think there's a little bit no escaping that, and part of me thinks it potentially always will be.
is there any like clothing items in particular that like irritate your skin or that create more issues than other sort of clothing items or materials?
Yeah, definitely. So people with AD, we all have like crazy um, routines and things we avoid, and it's hard to know whether they actually are something that affects you because it goes up and down on its own so much. It's so hard to run those experiments and see if it does or not. And also these things tend to have a bit of a delayed timer sometimes, so it will affect you 3 or 4 days later. In that time, well, was it that, or was it these other things that I had in that time? It's very difficult to isolate the variables, I suppose. But yeah, certain clothes like wool is, those itchy wool jumpers are no good
Yeah.
for me, and I have to, wash my clothes at 60 degrees very regularly. Same with my bed sheets. It's special washing stuff, it's special shampoo, it's special, everything is controlled, and it can quite easily get to the stage where your routine can become quite suffocating, because you'll try something, you won't be able to tell whether it helps or not, and you kind of think, oh well, it's not worth risking it, so I'll just get rid of that. And all of a sudden you're eating nothing and you've got this huge extensive routines. That's something that I've struggled with, is all of a sudden I turn around and I'm not eating soy, I'm not having dairy, I'm not having wheat, I'm not having this. I don't even know if they help, but just on the off chance that they do, I'm getting rid of them, which is, yeah, difficult to contend with.
Has diet and exercise been a huge, like, has it been a help? Has it been kind of like like you just mentioned, you don't, sometimes it works, sometimes it might not, but have you found anything that you do regularly that does help in terms of
I
a nutrition or exercise standpoint?
hmm I think so. When I was younger, one of the things my parents tried was I went on to like an extreme elimination diet. And I essentially ate like beans and pulses for like a month,
Mhm.
and then they slowly introduced stuff. And I found that I believe wheat has an effect on me, I think. And I'm still not 100% sure, but I think so. Um, I have a number of allergies in terms of nuts and salmon and things like that. I think generally just eating healthy does help. But it's weird. Sometimes I'll have a bad weekend and my skin will be fantastic. Or, one
Yeah.
time I went on a 2-week holiday around Italy, and I was having pizza and pasta pretty much every night and wine, and my skin had never been better. And some people, so then you immediately think, okay, what is that? So is it the sun the sun? But I've been in places where it's been sunny and my skin's been really bad. And so it, I have run every experiment I can. It just seems to have a mind of its own. I do think that exercise definitely helps for me personally, um, especially mentally. I think that that release, that endorphin rush, and frankly, I'm very insecure in the way that I look and my appearance, and so having something in my control that I can, in quotes, improve my appearance with, I find that quite therapeutic. That I have something that I is in my control to, in my mind, improve my appearance, if that makes sense.
I can feel the days where I exercise versus I don't. Like when I'm going to sleep, or just mood and anxiety, or just overall how I feel. Like the days where I'm not exercising, like you said, maybe it is a sense of control of like I can
Mhm.
do everything that I can to push myself this day in this component.
So I would say that the main thing is the psychological effect. I think that's what people don't really take into account. I think people look at the physical symptoms. I think people don't truly empathize properly with the physical symptoms. Again, it's something I say all the time, but cover yourself in itching powder and go about your day. Try and focus and be productive on your work. Try and go to sleep. Try and relax. Try and have a conversation with your wife when your brain is all over the place. Um, but it's a psychological impact that is pretty awful, and in the way that it dominates your cognition.
Yeah.
I guess it comes back to the itching thing again. I had a period where I was taking a medication called dupilumab, which is a fairly new medication that a lot of AD sufferers are getting a lot of benefit from. And I had about 6 months where my skin was clear, and it was incredible. And one of the main things I noticed was I had my cognition back. I had my full bandwidth. I
Mhm.
wasn't sat there, um, desperately trying not to scratch. Um, I wasn't. I was able to focus, and I just didn't have 80% of my mind elsewhere on the fact that I'm essentially in pain and uncomfortable, and that was so liberating. If I could just to like a little bit of a change of subject, but something I've learned quite recently, and kind of a more niche thing, but something I think is uh, quite a serious thing that people need to consider for carers of people with AD. There's something called NEAT, which people might know is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's essentially burning of calories basically through fidgeting. So so non-exercise activity. So you'll have those kids in school that their legs are always bouncing up and down and they're fidgety and they're always doing something with their hands. It I've been looking into this a little bit, and they can burn anywhere around from like 250 to 500, an extreme case 1,000 calories extra a day from that extra non-exercise activity. Now you take a kid that is incessantly scratching all day and is uncomfortable and sore, and it feels like they're covered in ants, and they're constantly moving and scratching, and that child is burning calories at a significant rate. And so I think that's something that's not being taught in AD and not being considered in AD, but just kind of like a niche thing that I wanted to throw out there, because I think it's definitely something to consider. When I was growing up, I was painfully skinny, like painfully skinny. I'm still a pretty skinny guy now. So potentially it could have affected my growth and affected me through puberty, that lack of nutrients, because I was burning so many extra calories. So yeah, just to throw something a bit different out there in terms of advice, I
Yeah.
guess.
That's interesting. I agree, like
Mm,
fidgeting and moving and just getting up and going to get something from the staff workroom or from the kitchen and just, like you said, shivering. And yeah,
mm.
that's interesting because never thought about that. And I wonder if there's a
You just
connection
yeah.
maybe between kids that have AD and whether that maybe they're not gaining weight. Is there been
Yeah, I
any
think so.
association,
I
do you
was
know,
speaking
Sue?
to I think so. I was speaking to one of my friends, James Hardwick, on one of my other podcasts, and he has AD, and he was saying something similar. His dad was, I think he said his dad was 6'2", and he's 5'8", and he's saying the same thing. Potentially, it has an effect. This is all kind of theory, but
Hmm.
as I say, if you're literally scratching all day, that is going to burn some extra calories in a period of your life where calories is important when you're going through that growth stage. So I think that's something that's important to consider. Another little thing for while we're on the topic of carers, scratching causes so much damage, and it's incredible the amount of damage you can do with just your fingernails. But there's sometimes the risk, and so because it causes damage, um, carers, parents, want to stop their children from scratching. And sometimes it can become across a little bit too much like victim blaming. The reason your skin is bad is because you've scratched. And I think that
Hmm.
is completely the wrong way to go about it. I think that it's, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think it's almost similar to telling someone with Tourette's not to tick. That you get to a point, if you have that extreme itch for days, weeks, months, you can sit on your hands for a while, but eventually everyone would break. And you shouldn't be blamed for doing so. And so I think that when you walk in on your kid and he's or she's covered in blood, bless them, and they've damaged their skin, please treat that child with compassion, and understanding and empathy. Don't berate them. Don't tell them off. The itch is the problem, not the scratch. You can't expect a child not to scratch when they have such an extreme itch. So if I could just give another bit of advice, I guess, to carers.
How many times were you told when you were younger that you need to stop scratching?
All the time. It was everyone's catchphrase around me, parents, teachers. And I know that it comes from a place of love, and it comes from a place of care, and um, but it's just something to consider, because that child will feel hugely guilty for what they've done. They suffer the physical consequences of it. They don't want to be doing it. And then to have on top of that your carers berating you for it and almost blaming you as if, well, look at your skin because it's because you scratch, you chose to scratch, is um, not the right way to look at that situation.
No, that's yeah. And again, it goes back right to how you frame and talk to people
Mm.
that have visible differences and what they're going through, just lack of
Mm.
understanding and lack of awareness. Like I know you mentioned there's a pharmaceutical company that you've been working with. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, of course. So when I was taking that, when I was taking that dupilumab, um, it's manufactured by a company, created and manufactured by a company called Sanofi. People might be familiar with Sanofi. As I say, I had that 6-month period where my skin was just clear, and I thought I'd found my cure. It was incredible. And I sent them an email because pharmaceutical companies get a very hard time, understandably, in some ways. If anyone's seen Dope Sick, that series on Disney about the Sacklers and OxyContin and all that stuff. But there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies who are doing amazing work and are full of very passionate people. I think it's a bit of a one-sided view, thinking of them as these evil empires, because it's just simply not the case. But I sent them an email just to say, look, thank you very much. Your medication has absolutely changed my life, so thank you. And there was a significance that I'd reached out to them. So from a regulatory perspective, they're not allowed to reach out to patients, but because I'd reached out to them, they were free to use me however they wanted. So they got me on this call with, head of PR and loads of other people. And they started throwing projects my way, awareness projects. So they're not allowed to, obviously, they're not allowed to advertise medications specifically, but they can fund awareness projects, which I think is a good thing. So they will fund AD awareness videos, stuff like that. So my first one was in conjunction with ITN. And then it just branched out. I did work with the British Skin Foundation, National Eczema Society, my campaigner for Changing Faces, and eczema outreach support. And it does kind of compound and just organically grow, I suppose. And I found it really interesting and inspiring and liberating as well. And so I would say to anyone considering advocacy, I'd say the way to do so is to just start reaching out to these organisations and introducing yourself and just say who you are, what your story is, and that you're there and willing to help.
That's amazing. Final few questions, because I think it's important. It's amazing you sharing your story. Like, I've learned so much just from talking to you today. What is one piece of advice that you would give other folks that have AD, to navigate life and how they feel dealing with flare-ups, whether it's physically or mentally? And from that, what would you advise folks with visible differences with self-acceptance because of the way they look or how they feel on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm. I spoke to a girl called Abigail Marin last week, and she gave an excellent answer to this that I'm going to basically steal. She's 20, bless her, and she's lovely, and she's had 100 facial reconstructive surgeries, and she is just amazing. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast if it's a little swear?
So go for it. I thought
Yeah.
it out.
She said, there's days where you're going to feel like shit, and that is okay. Just as in any other chronic condition, give yourself those days, and it's that balancing act between wallowing and being too much and die. There's that, somewhere in between. But just in the case of any other chronic condition, when you feel terrible, that's okay. Give yourself that day. Be kind to yourself. I think society sometimes has made us feel as if what we're dealing with is not that big of a deal, and they just kind of dismiss it, and then we start to let that infect us, and we start to say, when you're having that day when you just feel dreadful, you start to think yourself, I just need to crack on. Why am I making such a big deal out of it? No, what you're dealing with is very difficult, and so if every now and again you feel bad and you need to take some time, that is more than okay. I'd say that I wish I could say, you just need to be confident and be calm in yourself. And if you can do that, amazing. But speaking for myself and a lot of other people, I'm not in that place yet. And so I think there's some practical things that can help. So, for example, Changing Faces over in the UK have a skin camouflage service, which is something that I avoided for ages because I'm stupid and I'm a man and I don't wear makeup. And eventually I decided to do it. And it's given me a level of control, which has been life-changing, frankly, to be able to wake up on those days when I am suffering and have an option to be able to put something on to cover that, has given me a real sense of freedom. And so I would say, from a practical perspective, don't, even if you're a man, don't ignore that. It's such a helpful tool. And it doesn't need to be fair, it doesn't even need to be as extensive as the skin camouflage service. There's a company called Altruist, who they create sun cream with anti-redness in. So it's just a sun cream. You just put it on, and it's brilliant, and it covers it, and it gives you that little bit of confidence. And so I say, don't be afraid to try those solutions.
Yeah, I'm a man. Like, you can't say that. Like, oh, you can't cover up my scar. And then there was one time my wife was getting a makeup tutorial done, and I had like 15, 20 minutes. And I went to the lady who was doing my wife's makeup tutorial. I said, "Is there anything that I could put on this to like dampen it down a bit?" And because, my scar doesn't really change too much, it covers, it's a good 6.5 inches. But if it's cold, because there's no blood supply that's going to that area of the face, it stands out. Or if I'm like, exercising, or like you said, if you're blushing, it kind of stands out.
Hmm.
And she gave me some advice. And it was the first time where I was like, you know what, like maybe it's okay to wear makeup. And
Hmm.
especially, there's a lot of alpha men out there who are like, oh, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. But I think for men's mental health, and men's mental health is really going through a crisis at the moment. Like, it's okay to do things which go against, I guess the grain, as to say, or against conventional wisdom. And I think,
Hmm.
like you said, there is nothing wrong with a man wearing makeup if that's going to help with his mental health overall.
Hmm. Yeah, do what you need to do and don't berate yourself. There's certain people that will be okay with it. Amazing. That's awesome. There's certain people that aren't. And if you need it, that is okay. Don't beat yourself up and constantly be thinking, I should do this or I shouldn't do that. Do what makes you feel best, because you're dealing with something difficult enough as it is without mentally torturing yourself. There's a company in the UK that have um, essentially makeup for men, and they call it war paint. I think that's a really good title, because then all of a sudden us, yeah, stupid men are like, oh yeah, it's just war paint, it's fine. But yeah, just do what you need to do. Don't keep. I was always the same. I was kind of this like sort of march or die. Like, I just need to crack on and not let it affect me and get over it and all the rest of it. And since being a bit more kind to myself, I feel so much better mentally. Um, and I think other people would do the same. So yeah, I think that, yeah, don't. This is not me saying you should wear makeup. I'm just saying, if it's something you struggle with and you think that might help, give it a try. Just try it, and if it makes you feel better, if you have, it's nice to have that tool. If on certain days where you're really struggling, go for it. And I think it's something that's definitely worth a try.
I'm sure the alpha men will be like, oh, men should never wear makeup. But you know, you're not, I will never talk on someone else's mental health behalf. If it
Mhm.
does, like you said, if it makes you feel good and it makes you feel more confident and comfortable in how you live your day-to-day life, then who am I to take that away from you? So,
Mhm.
last question. Actually, not last question, because I've got a final question for you. What's one change that you would love to see in the atopic dermatitis world over the next 1 year, 5 year, 10 years? What is something which you think the AD world can do to make itself better?
Yeah. So it's going back to what I said earlier, which is one of my sort of core messages, I guess, of my advocacy, is that primary care needs to change. It needs to be improved. When that person walks through the door at his GP with severe AD, they need to have a way to assess that person properly, and to get them the care they need in a timely manner, because there are situations where that is an emergency, and that person needs help right now. And every single day that they're not getting the help is very hard to get through. Even when you get to the right place, you have a period where um, you get approved for a really um, serious medication that will potentially help you. um, then because it's quite serious stuff, it has to be delivered by a specialist company, which takes 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Every single day is hard to get through, so time is of the essence. This is pain that is so unisolated, is all encompassing physically and mentally, and that needs to be dealt with at speed. And so yeah, so GPs need to have a pathway to urgently refer severe AD sufferers. They can get the help they need in good time.
That sounds great. Um, I thought I was on my last question, but I have two more questions for you.
No, it's fine, as many as you want. I'm in no rush.
Um, what what would you tell your teenage self today? If, Andy, I'm not sure exactly how old you are. I'm not going to ask how old you are,
I'm 32.
but but if you could sit down with your 14, 16-year-old self, finishing up GCSEs or you're finishing up school and you've been dealing with those comments on, from people, and people might not necessarily understand what you're going through on a day-to-day basis, and you're struggling to like maybe accept the way you look. What would you tell your 14 to 16-year-old self today if you could sit down with them for a coffee?
I think I would say that you're doing incredibly well. I think that, I'm very lucky in that I had such a strong support network and people who would give me that recognition and that applause from what I'm going through. But even though I didn't take it in enough, I would say to myself, what you're going through is incredibly difficult and you're handling it incredibly well. And it was going to pay dividends. Your strength and your resilience is going to pay massive dividends down the road. And I would also say that there's points where the world makes you feel like you're the outcast and you're the weird one and you're the one with an issue, I suppose. But they're all wrong.
Mhm.
You're fine. What you're doing is right. Keep going, um, and try and be a bit more kind to yourself.
No, I love that. That's so true. Just being kind to yourself, just, that's just has such an impact on mental health.
Mm. I look back at that person now, and I don't quite know how I had the strength to do that. It's like I'm talking about a different person. I'm in a place now where I'm married, I have a house, I have, stability, and I'm still struggling.
Yeah.
To be 14 and in the absolute trenches, and you're thinking you're never going to find anyone, and everyone's telling you how weird you are. And I kind of am proud of the strength that I had when I was that age, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned your wife. How has she been in like the support structure? And when you first met and were interacting with her,
Mm.
um, as someone with a visible difference, navigating the dating scene and now getting married, how was that for you? And how has her strength of support been for navigating how you feel in a relationship?
She is she's is my she's a uh, my absolute she's I'm trying to how am I saying this? She's my absolute foundation, I would say. She's completely reliable in that respect. She has never once made me feel insecure about it. Um, I've been really blessed with the women in my life in terms of my mum and my wife, and they are just crucially important. And there's been periods where they may have saved me, frankly, because I was in such a bad place. When I first started dating Donna, I just did the same normal thing. I downplayed it. I didn't draw attention to it. I tried to pretend it was nothing. Um, and then as we kind of went further, and it's you can't avoid it, and the conversations start to come in. Um, but she has been an absolute rock, and has been so incredibly supportive and just so good for my mental health in terms of she's such an incredible woman that she makes me feel like I must be worth something. My feelings of self-worth were so low, and so if a woman like that is interested in me, then maybe I'm not completely awful after all, from a selfish perspective. So yeah, I can't say enough nice things about my wife in that respect.
That's amazing. So, Andy, I have for next people that come on the podcast. So, what is one question that you would like to ask the next guest, whether
Yeah,
it's related to
Stephen
mental
Bartlett,
health
Diary of a
or visible
CEO.
difference? I don't know if he's going to come on, but maybe one day, who knows? But yeah, if there's one
Okay,
question that you could ask, what would it be?
okay, okay. I've got a question. If you had a billboard that the whole world could see, what would you want your short message to be?
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking your time to speak with me today. Um, I'm sure there's hundreds, thousands, millions of people who feel how you're going through and what it's like to live with atopic dermatitis and visible differences. And I'm sure there are millions of people who could learn from your perseverance as well, like just learning about support structure and what you can do to make your life as good as possible when going through these sort of instances.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute privilege to be on your podcast. You were great, and hopefully you could be on mine at some point so we can hear a bit more about your story. But yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for listening.
So, Andy, plug yourself as well. Where can people find you if they want to find you?
Yeah,
Because
so
they will.
I'm.
They want to find you.
I'm like my handle is Life with a Difference, so I'm on everywhere. Yeah, YouTube, Spotify, Insta, TikTok. Something I try and say to as many people as possible. I will always make myself available for anyone that needs any help, and I'm sure Dan's exactly the same. So if you're struggling, reach out. We will always make ourselves available to help.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Dan.